3, 2, 1, go!
Alright, so jumping into this game, priority number 1 is, funny enough, to win the coin flip, because I really want to go second, despite the fact that this is an evolution deck. Now, I want to do that, especially after I see what my opponent is running off of their mulligan, because I want to deprive them of the supporter turn 1, but I also want to be able to get access to my own supporter because my hand is pretty bad, and I want to be able to hopefully use Ascension to cheat out a Trevenant right away, and basically deprive my opponent of their items as soon as possible, right? Now, my opponent actually does pretty well. They're going to know what's up based on the mulligan that I showed them, so they're going to pretty quickly establish an Urshifu V, they'll have the Rapid Strike energy, and yes, they're going to have the VMAX in hand, meaning they could potentially threaten game next turn if I don't get a pretty good draw off of my end. Now here, I actually decided to take a risk. I decided to just manually attach an energy and pray that off of my N, I'd be able to see a Phantump or 2, and then use the free Ascension with Dimension Valley to get my board at least somewhat established. And I actually do pretty well. I managed to get 3 Phantump into play, which ensures that I'm not getting board wiped and effectively losing on my opponent's second turn. And now that I have a Trevenant in the active, they are under item lock. They've got a Mimikyu stuck in the active. It's going to take 2 energy to manually retreat that. And while, okay, sure, you know, they have a V now with an energy attached as well, and they've mounted my Stadium, I really don't have to sweat it. And thanks to cards like Enhanced Hammer, I'm really able to grind this game out. And in fact, that's basically going to be my game plan throughout the course of the entire match. What I want to do here is just throw down Enhanced Hammers, Team Flare Grunts, and the one Faba that I have access to, and deprive my opponent of that Rapid Strike energy so that if a Gmax Rapid Flow is in my future, it's in the very distant future. And you'll even see me make some weird plays here, like gusting up the VMAX and then evolving up into Trevenant in its face. I want to do that specifically because of the Team Flare Grunt that I have access to. That requires that a Pokemon be in the active in order to discard its energy. So I want to trap the Urshifu there and basically force them to manually attach to it. Hopefully they attach Rapid Strike energy, and then I can just continuously deprive them of that, so that they're stuck maybe having to rely on manually attaching the basic fighting or going for Gale Thrusts, which obviously play much more to my tempo as a one prize deck. Now, by this point, my opponent pretty much caught on to what they needed to do. They needed to constantly bring up my Absol in order to break the item lock and give themselves a little bit of room, basically, to better establish their board. I'm forced to make some pretty costly choices here, you know, retreating, burning energies in order to get my Trevenants back in. But thankfully, you know, thanks to a Marnie from my opponent, funny enough, I was basically able to still buy a little time, you know, deprive them again of a Rapid Strike energy and actually start attacking pretty late into the game, about halfway, honestly. I get my first proper attack off. But, you know, again, my opponent's doing their job really well. They're gusting up the Absol. They're exploiting the one weakness that I have in my board, which is the fact that, yeah, I have this Fighting Weak thing that does take an energy to retreat. And, you know, Trevenant decks don't play a ton of energy either. I did have to burn my Super Rod pretty early on as well, so I'm not getting the full effect out of that. And in fact, I believe I burn it next turn, so, you know, at best I'm getting back 1 energy. But I have no choice at this point. I have to keep the Trevenant in the active, because if my opponent is able to, with the help of all these support Pokemon, reestablish their board, they can start chaining together Gmax Rapid Flows, and while I might not lose the game immediately, they can still put me in a pretty tight spot, especially if Absol stays stuck there and they just continue to chain those attacks over and over again, right? Because while Absol is in the active, they might have access to Special Charge, and then all my work to deprive them of those special energies might end up being for naught. But, you know, my opponent does actually make a pretty poor play here. They decide to KO the Absol, and this is particularly bad because, well, in my hand I have a Counter Catcher and an Ace Trainer, so, you know, at this point I can gust up something that I know is not going to move, I can deprive them of their hand, and now anything that they want to gust up has item lock. So, you know, while it would be nice to have the Absol to trap a few things if necessary, that Snorlax ain't going anywhere. And, you know, those support Pokemon ended up making for some really tasty prizes going ahead. Now, you know, it is a bit risky to leave the Snorlax trapped in the active there, because at least it can draw them into some cards, so they might see a Bird Keeper, for example, that can get the VMAX up and start, you know, going for the Gmax Rapid Flow. but I figure it's worth the risk, especially because by this point I've got my 3 breaks in play, which means that Gmax Rapid Flow, it's going to take 3 or 4 of them to completely wipe my board, and the whole time, thanks to my rescue scarfs, I'm able to just get back all of the pieces and continue to establish Trevenant breaks on board, right? I'm not too worried at this point, and really, I think by this point in the game, I might have taken out 1 or 2 Rapid Strike energies, so they're already running on fumes, and if they want to go for Gmax Rapid Flow, that just means that's another energy in the discard pile that you can't recover. So you can even see here that they ended up going for the Gale Thrust, putting some pretty serious hurt on me, but thanks to resistance and the break's HP, I'm basically able to tank the hit, drop a hammer, and here even play a little bit more aggressively, going for the Tree Slam into the VMAX instead of the Silent Fear. Still get the KO, thankfully enough, but in particular, I decided to do that because I wanted to push its damage counters up to the point where it's only going to take, let's say 3 or 4 turns of Silent Fear in order to take it out, instead of like the 6 or 7 that you have to, right? Doing 30 damage against 300 plus HP VMAXs, it takes a while to wipe a board. But thankfully, my opponent's just playing into my hands here. They actually end up having to manually attach and retreat, basically meaning that, okay, you've got 1 energy left in play. Sure, you took a KO, but my board is getting reestablished, and at this point, you're basically stuck, right? At best, my opponent's able to find the 1 more Rapid Strike energy, but you're not doing anything to me now. You have no switching option. The Gale Thrust is doing, 20? And thanks to a Team Flare Grunt off the top, my opponent is basically stuck. And here, picking up an easy 2 prizes means that if they don't have anything, I'm just going for another Silent Fear in order to take game. They do play the Desperation Birdkeeper, hoping to see something, but they don't, so it's well played and Silent Fear for game. And there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Taking out a giant of the Sword and Shield era with the husk of an old tree from the X and Y era. It's not always the most winnable matchup, but with a decent start and a little bit of luck, you can effectively grind out a win against big baddies like Rapid Strike URSHIFU VMAX. And a quick look at the list tells you everything you need to know. In pretty much every matchup, discarding energy and trapping something in the active is the way to go. And while this will occasionally lead to less than stellar hands, you are able to buy yourself some time thanks to item lock. And this is actually pretty easy to succeed within Expanded because a good number of decks, like Urshifu, tend to run on special energy. And they can't exactly drop a special charge under item lock, can they? But overall, it's a really fun list to take for a spin, but do keep in mind that power creep has gotten to the point where your opponent can probably just outmuscle you in most cases, especially if they happen to be running a welder deck or a control-oriented list like Guardian, which don't rely too much on items, or in the latter case can deprive you of your hand. Also, trying to take out a ton of VMAXs with 30 damage from Silent Fear every turn means it's going to take a little while to get there, which might give your opponent the time they need to catch up. But hey, take it for a spin, make some tweaks, and let me know how you do with this upgraded X and Y Classic. And if you guys appreciated the fun little twist on today's video, please take a second to share it with your friends. You don't have to like, sub, or any of that noise, unless you want to, but I would be extremely grateful if you could help me get more eyes on this video in particular. It was a labor of love, so, a few extra views over the usual would be amazing. And that's it for now. I will catch you all next time, and until then, take it easy.